Welcome, Lisa.
Thanks for having me.
And we have to do a location check because I know we spoke with Enrique and he was in Miami and Mishti's in Hawaii. I'm in Mammoth Lakes, so we're like all over the planet. So where are you signing in from today?
I'm in San Francisco, old school.
Oh wow! Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Have you been there? Oh, Potrero. Oh, I used to live over in Potrero many years ago. It's great over there. Do you have any? Are you a plow person? Do you wait in line for brunch for 3 hours?
I'm not into waiting. No, I'm not really. Way too impatient for that. So more of an Uber Eats person. I've also only lived here in the pandemic. So.
You moved to San Francisco for the pandemic.
No, I lived in the marina before that, and then I moved in with my fiance during the pandemic.
Oh, cool.
At his house in Potrero Hill. So I'm not particularly super familiar with the Potrero scene.
Got it. Yeah, so we have to get some Farley's coffee when it all opens back up.
Yeah, I've heard these things. People really have a high degree of affinity for Potrero Hill.
Yeah, it's got like a cult following among residents. Yeah.
You have some team members around there too in SF, or I know there's like a burgeoning Miami office. Maybe Enrique talked about.
Yeah. We're building kind of a distributed model. So a couple of people from different cities. The cities that we're intending to build out of would be San Francisco, Miami, New York, and Seattle.
Do you already have like a physical
talent in every city? What?
Do you already have a physical location in San Francisco where the office will be, or is starting to become?
We work out of WeWorks.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, today obviously, but we work out of WeWorks normally.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is that kind of how? Do you imagine that like scales to dozens or hundreds of people, or how do you think about sort of the place that WeWork plays in serving your real estate needs as a company?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not like particularly bullish on WeWork as a business,
okay.
but I'm really a big fan of like getting SoftBank leverage however you can. So if that's in subsidized, it's great. But like jokes aside, I think we would work with WeWork until it didn't make sense. Depends on what happens with commercial real estate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool. And out of all those hubs, is each one the intention would be to have like a WeWork style office at each hub so people can come together? Is it every day? Is it a few times a week? How do you think about sort of people convening in physical location?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we're thinking about the future of work, I do think distributed work is going to continue. It's something that Assemble helps our customers with fairly well with the multi-location strategy and multi-currency strategy. I'm sure Enrique spoke with you about that. But I think for us, a distributed office works well. My prior startup, Abnormal Security, actually started as a distributed office with 2 offices in New York and California. It worked super well. So that's probably what we would do. And then I think we would be work from home flexible, and meaning like a few days a week, not in the office. And a big reason for that is you're just seeing data that it's friendlier to women, it's friendlier to mothers, and it's friendlier to working parents, minorities. A lot of the research coming out from McKinsey and others that look at these things, the strong preference for, especially for minorities, is to have women and minorities and parents is to have some amount of work from home flexible during the week. So that's probably the direction that we'll go in.
All right. So it actually sounds like it actually is both maybe a good business decision, but also mission aligned with some of the other things that you're getting at with Assemble.
I mean, work is something that we think about a lot, right? Work and then compensation in general, all forms of compensation, how to bring a kind of human capital together and make them most effective. That's certainly something that we think about a lot as a business. And so we've spent some time thinking about it over the course of the pandemic.
Yeah. And what were those early conversations like when you and Enrique were first talking about some of the problems you were seeing when you were together at Expanse, right?
Yeah. So
space.
Sorry, say that again, Mishti. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, just as you guys were thinking about this space, I'm wondering what the early discussions were kind of like.
Yeah. So Enrique and I worked fairly closely together at Expanse. I was the first business hire of Expanse, and then he joined later as kind of the first finance hire. And we worked on a number of things together, like pricing, go-to-market strategy, customer acquisition strategy, marketing, a bunch of things. But one of the things that we worked on was compensation. So my level of interface was as a kind of an employee and a stakeholder. So I was the only woman actually at Expanse, excuse me, for like 2 years. Yeah, it's a heavily male team. Like the entire time I've ever been an individual contributor, really, you know. And then I went on to be kind of a first-time hiring manager. So worked with Enrique as he was kind of building the compensation strategy. I was trying to hire people for the first time, coincidentally, because I was doing kind of a product and go-to-market flex role. A lot of the positions I was hiring for were like the first non-engineering roles in the business. We were bringing on more women. And then also like difficult to price roles like customer success, marketing, et cetera. So I kind of interfaced from it, you know, with it from that perspective, and also thinking through, okay, how do I appropriately advocate for people that I'm bringing into the business while simultaneously representing, you know, the business's policies on compensation, making sure that I'm understanding it, you know, and kind of doing my job correctly as a first-time hiring manager, which I'm sure is an experience that a lot of people have. So when we originally started working on this, I think at Expanse, the mission was sort of similar, or like there's sort of a similarity with what we were doing at Expanse, where we were trying to help organizations better manage assets more efficiently, you know, given bureaucracy and dealing with things over time and whatever. So like that was what we were sort of doing as the project of the business. And simultaneously, we had this parallel experience where, yes, we weren't a Fortune 500 company, we weren't this huge bureaucracy, but we were already coming into human capital management problems, and they centered around compensation. So, you know, how do you effectively allocate resources? How do you plan for the future? How do you get stakeholders that are kind of required to implement a particular compensation strategy, like a hiring manager or a department leader, on board with a strategy? And then how do you communicate that to the business in order to build trust with employees, make people feel valued, motivate them, reduce churn, et cetera? And like, that's a really complicated cross-functional problem. And I think when we looked around, we said, wow, okay, your like tools in your toolbox for dealing with this are like spreadsheets, meetings, like where you go, like try to explain to people your strategy. There's no sort of self-service culture without tools, you know, around compensation, and data providers. What should this look like, and what will it look like in the future? And I think it's a combination of, you know, there's sort of this surprisingly quantitative and cross-functional problem dealing with compensation. So it's kind of ripe for software and workflow automation that wasn't really served by software, combined with these huge changing tides in the way that people work, where there's kind of a move to a distributed workforce. There's a sort of global war for talent. There's this emergence of new roles. You've got title inflation. You have more generations coming onto the workforce that care about things like pay equity. You have more of a move for, you know, a welcome move to social justice, where people are actually, you know, asking questions like, what is your, you know, diversity strategy, not only with respect to hiring, but once you bring people in. And I think it was just, we were kind of looking toward the future and thinking, okay, number one, not only is this like very, very inefficient, but it affects us as operators and also as underrepresented minorities in tech. And this is not how the world is going to be, you know, in the next 10 years. This is just not going to be an appropriate status quo that's going to meet the demands of a changing workforce.
Yeah. And I mean, these are such big, important, hairy problems. I wonder, you know, I mean, when you state them like that, it just, you know, my mind is racing all the different ways you could address it and all the different potential needs that could exist in different orgs. And there's probably organizational cultural things that may need to evolve. And I wonder, how do you get a wedge in, or a starting point? How do you think about, like, you know, finding your first kind of customer profile or identity, or first data service or workflow service or information service? Or like, there's so much going on here. Like, how do you distill it down to something that you can kind of achieve?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the like perennial challenge with any kind of platform play, where you're kind of caught between how do we, you know, build out the platform, but also provide immediate value as a point solution such that we can get customers. And I think that that's probably a product challenge common to a lot of workflow automation type enterprise SaaS businesses. It's certainly something that we spend a lot of time thinking about. I think there's kind of a couple ways to constrain it. that Assemble has done. So one would be like tightening our ideal customer profile. So really making sure that we were focused on adding value to one specific type of business with a few specific types of features. And so when we think about that, we can think about, okay, well, we're just going to focus right now on mid-enter, small to medium businesses, not really, like medium businesses. So a few hundred people and up, all the way to a couple thousand people that have the type of challenges and are mission aligned with the type of things that that we're trying to solve. So pay equity and diversity, equity and inclusion would be one of them. So would building a location-based comp strategy. So would organization-wide sharing. So companies that are sort of predisposed to wanting to have an employee relations strategy that's focused on authenticity and transparency with respect to compensation and really take that seriously. So, kind of honing in our ideal customer profile has helped us understand, okay, what are the ways that we can provide immediate time to value in a couple different respects while we're building out the rest of the platform. I think another thing that has really helped Assemble as we started this company, and it's really like also why we started the business in general, which is like mission alignment. So if you get really aligned on like, what are we trying to do in the world? How are we trying to, make a difference? Then you can kind of take this sort of qualitative approach to how you're going to go about building your product. So an example that I would make is that Enrique and I have this very strong viewpoint that we believe in pay equity. We think this is important, that businesses should be able to instrument and understand the extent to which their policies are disproportionately impacting women and minorities, regardless of whether they are taking a, equal pay for all approach or a pay for performance approach or whatever. You should be able to document your policies and then instrument them. So that's one thing that has product implications. But another thing that we really feel strongly about, and I think it's because we were both early stage operators before, is that we don't think that pay equity and DE&I should compromise operational excellence. So we have 5 pillars. I'm sure Enrique talked to you about them: fair, equitable, consistent, competitive, and explainable. And those are kind of the things that you would want to optimize for as a business, with respect to compensation and human capital management, right? Like, it's important to be equitable, but you also need to be like solvent as a business. And you want to make sure that you're competitive in the labor market so that you can recruit the best people and then promote the best people and develop the best people. And it's not that really those are like a healthy tension, but I think sometimes when we talk about pay equity and DE&I, people can say, well, it's a trade-off because in order to pay everyone fairly, I need to not have this sort of high-performing culture. We really strongly do not feel that way. So we took a stance in the market that it's not a zero-sum game. You should be able to, make sure that you're treating everyone fairly and equitably, supporting and developing your talent while simultaneously being sort of dangerous from an operational execution perspective and really build this high-performing workforce. And that has guided a lot of product decisions too. So I think, to really kind of think about how to constrain it. I mean, probably the biggest mistake a company could make is try to do too many things at once, as I think you alluded to, David, which is like do the platform approach without thinking about time to value to the customer. And then when you're thinking about time to value, I think the 2 things that have helped Assemble are really honing in on our ideal customer profile and how we're going to add value to them, and describe that value and tell that story. And then the second would be really sort of aligning on what we believe about the market and taking a strong stance, not only from the eventual product, marketing perspective, we haven't really launched yet, but like a marketing perspective, and then simultaneously a product perspective.
Right. And when you talk about sort of that ideal customer, a lot of the kinds of ideas that you talk about sound like things that I probably hear a lot in kind of early stage technology companies. Seems like the kinds of philosophies that are probably becoming more common. Probably have had some commonality and becoming more common. So there's maybe less coaching or pulling that you need to do to convince people, and they may be already coming to that. But I wonder how much of that is kind of what you're already finding, or how much are people coming to you saying, hey, like, we kind of know we want to solve these problems, but what have you seen as best practices? And do you kind of get involved in sort of coaching people through the establishment, coaching companies through the establishment of how to accomplish these goals that you have?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think something that I really believe about the HR function in general, but also like businesses, is I do think that businesses or, people that are working on this problem related to compensation really do genuinely care about doing right by employees. They genuinely do care about being competitive. They genuinely do care about all these things. The problem is it's just really complicated, and it's complicated to affect in spreadsheets and then articulate as a strategy that you can hold an organization, to account for over time without software. And so typically when we talk to customers, they care about all these things and consider them very strategic, because it's like the most important thing that you should be working on as a business is, accomplishing your mission, but also assembling a team that's capable of doing that with the resources that you have available. And I think there's a lack of like consensus and also kind of tactical playbooks for how to actually affect these strategies in the market in a cost-effective and time-effective way, right? So like if you had all the time in the world and you were in HR, you could like build the best, most perfect, most accurate strategy for some aspect of compensation or for pay equity or for whatever, but like that's not actually feasible for the vast majority of businesses, or it's going to take a huge amount of time or require a huge amount of man hours from consulting or whatever, and not every business is in that position. So then the question becomes, okay, a product is not only just a way to kind of technologically enable a strategy, but kind of help you figure out what to do, given that you care about it. So like one example would be, how do you approach location-based comp? Obviously, everyone cares about that coming out of COVID, but there's probably a smarter way to do it and a less smart way to do it that's going to help you be consistent or inconsistent over time.
And just to understand the state of kind of people's thinking on this when they come to you, is it like they're asking like, we're using option impact or whatever, but we want a better idea of like comp in like more nuanced ways that maybe that platform doesn't provide? Or are they thinking like, we want to figure out, how specific are the questions, I guess? And like, what are the questions that come up most frequently in that first conversation or two before they have any idea of what you guys are doing and how you guys can work together?
Yeah, so that's one of the things about compensation is it's such a large problem for businesses, and there are so many people involved that it's like super thorny. And I think that's the reason that we haven't seen a lot of very good products in this space actually, is just like it's difficult to actually be sort of diagnostic about a problem and then build a compelling solution that fits in with the rest of the HR stack. So when customers talk to us, there's a number of different like value propositions to a business that they're trying to solve. There's a number of different questions, and then there are varying levels of specificity. And that can vary by, just like the amount of time that someone has to think about the problem, what their perception of it is, from their business function, right? So like a lot of people have a relationship with comp. As I mentioned, I never worked actually in HR. I was just a hiring manager and then serving on an executive team later on, trying to make sense of it. So my understanding of it before doing a bunch of research into how do you actually be a practitioner in compensation was also non-specific. But very concerned in that, it's a high degree of importance for the business. And so we do have a variety of questions that get asked. And I think the big question for Assemble is, how can we add value to the customers that we're intending to serve at the beginning? Mm-hmm. So I can tell you that like the couple of things that I think have really won over a few of our early customers that we've done well has been really engaging the full organization with engaging managers, kind of engaging other personas within HR. HR is still our buyer, but like making it easy to kind of engage and align the rest of the organization. We do believe that compensation is a shared responsibility. And what we mean by that isn't that everybody can make their own decisions about comp, but that HR can set a strategy, and they have a hard time sometimes making sure that everybody's on board with it and then tracking that over time. So kind of increasing alignment across the org, doing location-based compensation strategies, especially across currencies and like countries. And then another would be like pay equity and DE&I. So we have a strong opinion there. And then I think this is like a fourth thing. I think I said three things, but another thing is really just that we do believe that, businesses should be operationally sophisticated, and you don't have to like super oversimplify everything that you're doing in the interest of pay equity or DE&I. You just need kind of a software platform that will allow you to be consistent over time. And so we have opinions there, and that has really helped us win trust too across the organization with finance and with the C-suite.
And what does the organization look like typically when you're first meeting them with those value props? Are they dozens of people, hundreds of people? Like what does a typical kind of customer profile look like when you're first starting to engage?
Yeah, we tend to work with companies that are a couple hundred to a couple thousand. right now. Mm-hmm.
So they kind of have a bunch of functions built out, but they have a sense maybe they're not doing it the way they want to or the way they could if they had more kind of professional software tooling and advice kind of package.
Yeah. That's one of the things about compensation is like it can change a lot. You can have reorgs, you can have a different, a change in philosophy, et cetera. But also, it's like this recurrent problem because you're always hiring people, you're always trying to retain people, you're always trying to promote and give raises and plan for the future. And so there are a lot of kind of touch points throughout the course of a fiscal year where someone would be reevaluating a business process.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the kind of recent COVID kind of changing of future of work. How the future of work may be changing because of the impact of COVID and sort of resetting of people's expectations. And I wonder if there's. I've heard a lot of people debating. Obviously there's like the in office or fully distributed or hybrid, and then you mentioned a lot around like location-based pay equity. And I wonder if people come already with sort of a plan or an idea, like if they say we want to have, this style, is it sometimes like, do you have to get it consistent with the way you're already thinking, or do you sort of have plans that would adapt to maybe if a company comes and says we're doing some sort of location adjustment, or another company says we're not doing location adjustment? Can you kind of work within each of those contexts, or do you try to sort of coach people into the philosophy of Assemble?
Yeah, I think so our product's fairly configurable. So I think this is a philosophical position we've taken as a business, which is that, many different types of companies and many different philosophies on compensation can exist. And part of making sure that you're, doing well and, making better compensation decisions in a systematic way is just ensuring consistency. And so the rough formula that we would suggest for an organization is, align all of your decision makers around a particular philosophy, come up with a strategy to execute that philosophy, and then, make sure that you're systematically tracking it over time and then instrumenting whatever your business process is such that you can tell with leading indicators whether it's working or not. So in the context of, let's use location-based comp strategies as an example, we would say, decide if you're going to pay people, variable by location. Are you going to treat your entire employee population the same, or are you going to treat certain functions differently? So make sure that you're aligning on that at the very beginning. Determine your philosophy. Then build a location-based comp strategy within Assemble that affects that strategy. And then over time, actually track whether it's working or not. So if you're, compensating differently in Atlanta versus San Francisco, and let's say you apply a just blanket 20% discount to San Francisco based on market data variation, how can you look at over time whether the offers that you're giving out in Atlanta are truly 20% less, or you're doing it variably, and if you're doing it variably, for women or minorities? So that'd be one question. But the second would be is it affecting your bottom line? Are your hiring rates different? Are your churn rates different? Are your promotion rates different in the Atlanta market? Maybe that's a sign that your comp philosophy is wrong. And I think that's sort of like the dream formula for being super operationally sophisticated, just in general for almost anything. But true for Assemble too is you need to have alignment from your leaders. You need to have a strategy that that actually would bring that philosophy to fruition. And then you need to track it over time to make it sure it's actually working. And if it's not, change it. Mm-hmm. And so that's sort of the approach that we've taken. I think that is kind of distinct, especially among DE&I and social good companies, because we aren't saying, that you should not compensate differently by location, that you should do whatever. We're saying decide what you're going to do and then be consistent about it. And it's in that consistency that you're going to be truly fair and equitable.
Right. And getting those feedback loops seems like it can be challenging too. So are you going out and doing like broad market survey stuff, or are your customers or partners kind of feeding in data that helps inform, how to ensure that feedback loop is in there and that the consistency is achieved?
Well, we would help you, instrument your comp practice so that you could see that in numbers. But, as we're starting to build out location-based comp strategies, some people will come to us and say, what are people doing? What's the market doing? And we can provide information about trade-offs there. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Are there any sort of like aha moments that come to mind, either that like early customers have seen or you sort of noticed yourself when you were working in hiring, in terms of like noticing sort of a mismatch between the philosophy and what was going on the ground?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that that's like the crux of the problem is like there are a lot of compensation administrators, and this is really frustrating too. Like imagine spending a huge amount of time in a people function,
Yeah.
building a strategy that's really well founded, and then losing the support of your, head of engineering because he or she just like doesn't believe you and then goes and does whatever. Like that's a really good example of like a toxic dynamic in a business that affects their ability to achieve their goals. And so that's why we focus so much on cross-functional collaboration. Is really like, okay, you have a business strategy, which is probably to grow as a business and then, hire your team to accomplish your mission and get people to want to pay for it. And in order to do that, you need a human capital strategy increasingly, especially as the United States, specifically, we're all in the US here, is focused on the intangible economy. That's clearly the future, the rise of tech. What's important in that situation? Of course, your human capital. And so you need a strategy to accomplish your business and be operationally dynamic. And that strategy needs to increasingly incorporate, being competitive in multiple markets, caring about pay equity, caring about DE&I, caring about non-cash forms of compensation. It's just like where the labor market's moving. And so I think a critical piece of that is aligning people around a strategy that you can actually affect, and then making sure you're moving as quickly as possible in order to like actually accomplish your goals. So COVID has taught everyone that you need to be able to turn on a dime when it comes to changing your strategy in response to a changing world. How many businesses are actually set up to be that operationally sophisticated? And I think that my like strong opinion here is that the companies that are the most operationally sophisticated, that can dynamically plan the best, and that can, build business processes to align their organization and change quickly, respond to new types of talent like younger generations, those are going to be the companies that build, the biggest businesses in the next 10 and 20 years. And so that's what it is focused on. And that's one of the pain points that we're really trying to work, especially with our HR leaders on really early on, is, okay, you have this strategy. How do you build trust with your employees such that they feel like they're being paid fairly and competitively and valued? And then how do you build trust with or build buy-in in the process with your hiring managers and your department leaders and your finance leaders and your C-suite in order to actually go affect this strategy and tweak it over time and really be sort of a strategic leader in the organization. And that's like a really difficult pain point to solve, especially without modern enterprise SaaS, which is partially why I think so many solutions in the market have not had a hugely positive impact on the business.
Mm-hmm. How much do you basically let the company interface completely with like employee facing interactions, or is there sort of, do employees plug into Assemble also to kind of like get communication about their compensation, equity, and all of that? Is it like purely enterprise focused, or how do you think about the other kind of side of the table?
Yeah, I mean, today there is some amount of interaction with employees, but not a huge amount. But we're also early in our development. Over time, I think it does solve one of our product tenets, which is to engage the full organization. Right now, we have a huge kind of role with managers and with other department leaders that are strategic kind of stakeholders in compensation, but our buyer is still HR.
Right.
Yeah.
And I wonder if we could, we talked a lot about sort of the customers that you serve and sort of the process, but I wonder if we could switch gears a little bit and talk about the Assemble organization and sort of what does that look like and feel like, and, kind of what's your sort of perspective on that. So I wonder if you could, give us a little bit of your perspective on like, what is a day in the life of, do you call yourselves assemblers, or do you have a cute name like that yet? What's a day in the life of an assembler?
We should, yeah. I think that's cute. We can do that.
Because you're assembling. Everybody works on Assemble is assembling the machine.
The assembly. So many
assemblers. Assembly.
Yeah, I can tell you a few things. So we've been growing fairly quickly, obviously, because we've been around for less than a year. Everyone can still fit in a Zoom screen. We do come together, in specific locations. Everybody pretty much. We wouldn't hire anybody that doesn't care about fair and equitable compensation, but most people are very strongly mission aligned, which is a big reason why they decided to join the business. We've biased in our hiring a little bit toward more experience. So people that have kind of done things before. An example is like our front-end lead has built out a number of different like SaaS web products before in the past in Silicon Valley. So like Dropbox, Asana. We bias more toward that, which has helped us move really quickly. And then we're a fairly collaborative culture, I would say too. So we kind of nerd out on diversity and inclusion and pay equity. There's kind of a pluralism of thinking among our team, and we really spend a lot of time trying to facilitate that. So spend a lot of time kind of debating that. And right now, we're really heads down building a lot of product, and are going to be doing that over the course of the next couple of months.
Right. And given the mission alignment, I wonder, it almost seems like that'd be a certain type of like a lightning rod to attract the people who care about it, because, so I wonder, do you blog about that a lot, or do you how do people hear about that? And so, like, I assume people kind of come already teed up, excited about the mission, and they're like, oh, Assemble, where have you been all my life? So how do people actually hear about the mission, or kind of that you're working on this?
From a recruiting perspective?
Yeah, like if somebody wanted to work on this mission but didn't know you exist, where might they kind of accidentally bump into you, or how do you find them? How do they find you?
Yeah, I mean, we've done a little bit of blogging, just using that as an example. We've done a little bit of blogging. I probably have twice the amount of drafted blog posts, like waiting than I have published, just because it takes a lot of time to write something well, and I've got a lot of other stuff going on. But that is an important part of kind of what we're doing. We do want to help people too, even people that aren't necessarily customers. So that's sort of a component of the blog. From a recruiting perspective, we've hired really good people that have recruited their friends. It's like always a good sign when you have team members that people want to follow. So we've done that, and we've kind of found some people that way. And then we've done a lot of outbound recruiting. We especially did a lot of it like 6 months ago, and just put information about our mission in the initial outbound communications. It's actually kind of fun to recruit for a problem like this, because so many people have a personal relationship with it that you get like cheered on a lot. Like even if engineers don't want to like respond to your email, like every once in a while I'll get a response that's like, hey, I'm not looking to move, but like I just want to let you know like how much your mission matters. And it's just like actually really heartwarming. Like I don't know, I led an SDR team at Abnormal for a period of time, and like it can be demoralizing to do outbound recruiting or outbound sales, and it's actually fun for this problem space. And then I've done a couple of talks on like how to negotiate, how to think about the value of equity, mostly just because it's like something that I personally care about. And so especially those are mostly in women's communities. And so we've kind of done some brand awareness there, but because things have been closed, especially in COVID, I would say the vast majority of our recruiting strategy has been just outbound recruiting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that
I
is
can
something
imagine.
we're talking about with Enrique too. Just like there's so much murky water around all of this, and like everyone, especially like minorities in tech, I'm sure just feels probably very uncertain a lot of the time. Like, is this fair? Should I be asking for more? Same thing on the other side. Like, and there's really no content or like even aggregation of resources that I can think of for startups who are looking to do the right thing, or employees who are looking to like check if they're standing up for themselves. That feels like a good rallying point.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have a relationship with this, not even just women and minorities. I mean, this can affect everyone. And I think the crux of it is, am I being paid fairly for the role, or am I being taken advantage of? And when you're at a small company like Assemble and you have 10 people, you just need to trust the person giving you the offer, that they're, truly thinking about, something fair. They're spending a lot of time figuring out if this is a market acceptable wage, et cetera. When you go to a bigger company, you have to trust the system, right? So even if you get a bad boss or, whatever, that someone is looking out for you. And let's say you're a software engineer, you're not being given a salary based on your ability to negotiate, which has nothing to do with your job, but instead is more of a reflection of your skills and ability to contribute to the organization. And I think a lot of people have questions about that. right? And a lot of people have questions about how to approach it and what's appropriate, from the employee side. We of course want to help with that, but we're also focused on the employer side significantly, as a business, just because when we thought about the system, we realized how inefficient it was. I mean, I feel like when I came out of undergrad, it didn't really occur to me that compensation could be as inefficient as it is in so many different places. And the closer I got to it, I like to think about systems. I mean, I think this is like how I spent my career. I was in cyber before this. I really enjoy thinking about that. A lot of people in tech do. And the closer I got to like how a business actually operates and how they think about human capital management, the more that I was like just totally shook by the fact that it was, as inefficient as it was.
Yeah.
It affected so many people, right? Like that's another thing that we do at Assemble is track the number of like families that we're helping. So, the number of companies that you're bringing in, it's, the number of people whose compensation has some amount of sunlight or, systematic oversight from Assemble.
Yeah. Right. Like a lot of people ask us this, I think, and I'm curious about what your advice might be to someone who's kind of like earlier in their career in the tech world, trying to think about like how to approach an offer they've gotten. Like, are there resources that exist publicly right now that you think are really good to point people towards, or like how would you navigate it from scratch right now if you didn't have like, I don't know, Assemble for the prospective employee already built out?
Yeah. So I think on the employer side, there's a responsibility to be sort of systematic and data driven. And then actually to say, you can like Frank Slootman everyone and say like, oh, we really care about pay for performance and we really like want to hire the best people to the best role. And I would say that you are declaring that by fiat until you have data to actually support that you aren't discriminating against certain groups, that you're allocating resources, actually according to performance in the way that you think that. And if that's the case, like go ahead and, have a nice day. But, on the employer side, I think you do need to be systematic and consistent. On the employee side, not every company operates like that. I would say even the minority of companies right now operate like that. I'm not sure that that's still going to be true in 10 years. But today, a lot of business process isn't necessarily worked out, especially the smaller you go as a company. And so for the employee, you shouldn't necessarily be apologetic about asking questions as part of the interview process to make sure that your like someone has put thought into your compensation. And it's sort of like people use the term negotiation. It is negotiation, but it's like really self-advocacy. And so I would not approach things as an employee in a way that can come off kind of accusatory or like entitled necessarily, but I do think that like just really politely being persistent and unapologetic about making sure that your compensation is fair, that you agree with the way that they've thought about it, that they can articulate it. That's a good sign that someone has put some thought into an offer package. And if you feel like they haven't, then, I don't know, I would say that like you should try to get as much as you can in that situation. That's just basic self-advocacy. So that would be how I approach it.
Yeah, that's a topic. Actually, we hear a bunch of different people kind of touching on this, and like I'm thinking of our conversation with Lexi, where he was, a former guest who came on, and he has, I think, a bunch of like advice or help for, prospective candidates who would be, employees, and I feel like there's like not enough resources just for like you mentioned these self-advocacy. I would love to see, a tweet storm. If you could just give us like the 10 phrases to use for self-advocacy, I think that'd be like an amazing resource that would get shared around a lot and would be really useful to a lot of people. Have you ever kind of structured? I know blogging kind of takes a long time, but could you just fire off like the 10 self-advocacy phrases, or maybe just riff on them here? Or
I've actually done a couple talks on this, and I'm waiting to draft it to a post. I would really like to do that. I mean, I think there's like a couple of things to think about. Like number one, you should like, as a prospective employee, like kind of know your rights, and so that you don't have to say your past salary. You should have a strategy for not saying that, even if someone asks you point blank. So kind of knowing your rights and knowing kind of what you think you're worth in the market and what you want to what your goals are in a employment, in an employment relationship, but also in a salary negotiation. So it's like one category of things to think about. Another one is really like there is an art to negotiation. There are tips. You can read a bunch of books like Never Split the Difference and things like that to think about, okay, how do I approach a negotiation? What are the things that I should do? And then I think there's a third category of like your ability to get a fair and consistent offer package as an employee is partially dependent on the business's ability to be systematic about compensation in the first place. And like how mature are they when they're thinking about hiring people? Like did they have a level in mind or compensation band in mind when they opened the role? Did you match that level of experience or skill? Are they taking your level of experience and skill into account when they're thinking about compensation? How do they determine it? How are they thinking about promotions and raises? Like there's a number of questions that you want to like learn over the course of a like negotiation, with an employer as an employee. And I think really kind of having a strategy for all three of those is probably going to produce the best outcome, over time. So I would think about that. Actually, one person that wrote something recently that I thought was really good was Emily Kramer. She was the former head of marketing at Carta. She started the table stakes initiative at Carta, which was around like pay equity in general. And she wrote a blog post recently about how to think about negotiation. And because she spent a lot of time thinking about compensation in general because of equity, I think there was like an angle that you don't often see with employee related content, because employee related content is usually around negotiation, but they don't really demystify how compensation gets set, which you sort of need to know in order to be an effective negotiator and in order to like not feel bad about it. So she did a really good job kind of explaining that. And that's sort of like one of the categories that I would, go for if I were thinking about talking about negotiation in general.
Yeah. What were some of the things that she said in that, or some of the even more broadly things that people have shared in terms of like the second category of negotiation as an art that you found particularly useful?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things is like prospective employee. I feel like I'll talk to a lot of people, and this is true especially for women. I've spent more time talking to women, so I can't really speak to other groups, but I've spent more time talking to women about this specifically. And like, I think one of the things that I've noticed just anecdotally is that people try to self-regulate, like, oh, I want to make sure that other people are paid fairly. So like, I don't really want to, whatever. The problem is like, you have no control over what other people are paid. And you're a woman yourself, and you're a person that's entering into an employment relationship. So the company's responsibility is to make sure people are paid fairly. And you can advocate for that as an employee later on. But really in an employment negotiation, self-regulation, making sure that you're not kind of like taking up space from other people, isn't really something that you should feel guilt about.
Yeah.
The business's responsibility. And so reframing kind of negotiation, I think for a lot of people, especially people that are like anxious or intimidated about negotiation in general, as just advocating for yourself, I think is like the number one first thing. And then one of the reasons why Emily's post is so good is because she does talk about the mechanics of how compensation gets set. And demystifying that for employees, I think, is really helpful, because then you can understand like, okay, this is the responsibility of an employer. These are the right questions to ask. And if a company is saying we don't negotiate, many companies that really care about pay equity and DE&I don't want to do that. And it's not that they're not, it's not that they are predatory or anything. It probably truly is because they're trying to maintain a system and be consistent about their compensation decisions. And so if someone asks you to not negotiate, you want to make sure that you're asking questions that give you confidence that they have a strategy in place that they're adhering to, and that pay is truly fair. Mm-hmm. And if they're doing it right, they should be able to evidence that to you.
Is that generally the advice that you would give to an organization, is to keep a strong system and then just communicate the system, but not necessarily have exceptions to the system? And is that sort of part of the philosophy of what you would sort of advise people?
Assemble would not take a position necessarily that you can't negotiate. Part of the problem of like process of like bringing an employee into a business is like you have an opinion about their skills and experience, and they probably have an opinion about their skills and experience, and you use the interview process to sort of make a evaluation of that. You could be wrong. So like it is complicated. Like there is some amount of art, and there's some amount of asymmetric information. But I think what we would advocate for strongly is being systematic. And so like, before you even open a rec, having an understanding of what the levels are, what the skills and experiences are that you're looking for. And then, making sure that your interview process takes that into account, that you're sort of in as unbiased a way possible, using data to determine what level someone is in, and then ensuring that you're giving them an offer within a pay band. And if you are allowing for negotiation among some groups, it should be the same among all groups. So if there is an offer renewal process that requires escalations for some groups, it should be the same with all,
right,
consistent with that position and level.
Right.
That's the opinion that we would take. And it should be documented. And, one of our pillars of Assemble is that things should be explainable. And what that means is, you need people to feel bought into a process. People need to feel valued. The easiest way to do that is by explaining how you came up with a particular decision. That's a really important part of the employee-employer relationship, or the employer-hiring manager relationship. And so making sure that you have business processes documented is, of course, an important component of this. Right.
When you were talking about sort of self-advocacy, one thing that I have seen people do that I think, my observation would be that I think helps employees or kind of prospective candidate employees is in kind of a, I don't know if you want to call it role playing or talking through kind of some of the statements you might make. So have you seen that, or like when you've given these talks, have you sort of advised that kind of thing, or do you have sort of other collectives or clubs that people might go to find almost like, I don't know what you call it, debate partners or sparring partners to try to get to crystallize your self-advocacy phrases?
I mean, I think preparation is performance in almost all things, right? So like, you want to make sure that you're prepared. I can tell you what I think going into a big negotiation or sales meeting or like anything is really to make sure that you have a clear, plan for handling something. And so, one way that I could see this going wrong, I think I mentioned earlier, is like, if someone asks you what you're currently making, you're not legally obligated to answer that in the state of California and New York and Colorado. And if the Paycheck Fairness Act passes anywhere in the United States, and there's a reason for that, because it perpetuates pay inequity. So, if you don't want to say that because it might hurt, work against you, which it probably would, you should have an answer or like a planned way to respond to that. So yeah, I do suggest that. I also think people should just talk about comp more. It's going to produce a more efficient market. The smarter employees are, and the smarter companies are, and more sophisticated that they are, you're going to get a better employee-employer relationship that's more productive. I do truly believe that, which is going to make the labor market more efficient, which is going to make businesses more efficient.
Yeah, I wonder if you have sort of a perspective. I think a few companies, I think Buffer may be one of the ones that's more like in the radical transparency. I think they publish all the different roles and titles and comp associated with each. Is that right? That recollection? I think they're somewhat famous.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think is that like the future? Is that kind of everybody will move toward that model, or is that kind of like some experimental stuff, but there's reasons to hold back today? Or how do you look at sort of the more experimental, or the kind of the people pushing the boundaries, and you sort of how do you think about that within the context of transparency and efficiency? And
I mean, so Assemble doesn't do that. We don't say what everyone's comp is. We don't say what levels people are. I mean, I think a lot of the compensation conversation can be confidential for a good reason. It preserves people's confidentiality. It doesn't breed like discontent or like bad team dynamics. It is in many cultures and in many situations personal and for good reason. But it can be used as a shield, if you don't have business processes in place and there is inequity. I mean, there's a reason that sometimes it can be a black box. I think, and for some companies, it could be a risk mitigation strategy. Assemble's specific position on this is you can be Buffer and you can be much more opaque and much more old school about compensation, but you should be systematic about it, and that's going to produce better outcomes for the business. In terms of resource allocation, it's going to produce better outcomes for the business in terms of like what you get out of your human capital, whether you're able to retain top talent, et cetera. So we feel strongly that businesses should be operationally mature, and a huge component of that is managing compensation in the service of human capital management. So kind of consistency and systematization, depending on your beliefs, is important. Maybe the one thing I would say is that I do think that the world is moving toward more transparency in general, and toward more of a focus on pay equity and DE&I and actually verifying that. So having a compensation process in place that allows you to do that easily on an ongoing basis, I think is ultimately going to make you more competitive in the new world of work, or more competitive in the new labor market. Yeah.
Makes sense. What do the naysayers tell you? Like, when you were thinking of this idea and now, like, what's the pushback that you hear from people in terms of either like the overall concept or specific things that you guys really care about?
Yeah, I mean, I think some people don't quite understand like the mission. Some people might be like, well, you must be wanting to make everybody completely transparent. And that's actually like literally not our position. Our position is that people should be paid fairly and equitably. I think some people's resistance to pay equity as a movement is this idea that it's going to impinge on a business's performance, or impinge on their ability to hire and retain top talent or put the best person in the role. I take like a very strong view against that. I really, truly do not believe that pay equity and performance is a zero-sum game. Like, I really don't believe that. And I think that's like one of the reasons that Assemble got started, is to sort of prove that wrong. That the exact same businesses that have business processes that can be measured for performance and that are high performing in general are the exact same ones that are well positioned to evidence that they're paying people in an unbiased and fair way. So that is like strongly our position. But that's sort of a naysayer's comment. And then some people will say like, oh, well, businesses are too different and, too many special snowflakes. And this is why it needs to continue to say like, this is why it needs to continue to be billions of dollars of spend from consultants. And I want to know like what consultant is paying them off to say that, because you should be able to build business processes that allow, for a number of different types of business models to be systematic, compensate. I mean, it's not like, this isn't like rocket science. We're talking about we're talking about a lot of dollars and a lot of people, but like even Fortune 500 companies only have like 30 to 100,000 employees. So like, that's not huge numbers in 2021. You should be able to build efficient and consistent business processes around that with enterprise SaaS. I just think that's like, some consultant out there is paying people off to say that.
Definitely.
Cool. I know we're getting towards the end of the hour, and we got at least another couple questions that we wanted to get to. So I might try to transition one right now, which is, I think you said you're about 10 people today total. Mm-hmm. Is that right? And I wonder if you have sort of open roles that you're specifically trying to hire for. You mentioned you're generally more experienced workforce and kind of looking for that. I wonder, do you have any specific, is there another software engineering role? Is there a customer success or a sales role, or what is the sort of the next phase of kind of recruitment look like within Assemble?
Yeah, I mean, we're getting ready to hire across the board. I would say from an eng perspective, full stack engineers, and then probably more front end. Although that could change pretty quickly, just because we are very focused on building a lot of product in the next couple of months. So really heavily looking to hire in engineering, growth marketing, and sales would be helpful. And then, like you mentioned, David, we definitely want to make our first customer success hire. That's obviously very, very important for the business. And it's really important for us to have a trusted partnership with our customers. And so we're focusing on that fairly heavily right now. Those would be the main roles. So sales, growth marketing, customer success, and then across engineering.
Mm-hmm. And are you pretty active in the recruiting process at all steps and kind of everything to do there? Do you and Enrique share that responsibility, or do you kind of trade it off in different ways, or own different recs, or how do you sort of manage that part of the process?
Yeah, well, we're bringing on a recruiter soon, which is going to be great. But we both are pretty aggressive about it. I don't know, I have a penchant for like outbound SDR recruiting. And so I've been doing a lot of that. But Enrique and I probably both equally handle a lot of the interview process. And we're very focused on the candidate experience. That is a component of Assemble as a people company. We really care about attracting talent too, not just what they get paid after they join.
Yeah, totally. Well, I know we're almost at the hour, and we have this one favorite question that we like to ask all our guests, and we asked Enrique too, which is basically kind of putting Assemble aside, or maybe even including it. What are you like super curious about today? What are your big questions for the world? Like books that have piqued your curiosity, podcasts, anything, like big topics. What captures your mind these days?
Well, I can do something not related to work. I'm of course very interested in pay equity and DE&I and business operations just as a class of things. And I'm also interested in like systems and efficiency. That's true of other companies I've worked at too, but especially Assemble. Separate from that, I think things that I've really been thinking about a lot in COVID, honestly, is like municipal politics. I hadn't really thought about it that much. And then, it's been really fascinating over the course of the pandemic to watch, the power of various cities and school systems and local governments in terms of policy decisions, how that gets, determined, the agency of the public. I've just gotten really, really involved in like San Francisco, or like learning about San Francisco municipal politics, but then also it's just with me nationally.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Are there like, how are you following that? Just like records of town hall meetings and stuff, or are you following specific commentators or kind of reporters?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, the San Francisco Chronicle like education writer is amazing, and I'm interested in early childhood education. I don't know, it's just like a random thing that I'm very interested in. I've gotten really deep in Twitter on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, just generally, I have followed town hall meetings and minutes too, and then there are a couple of crusaders on Twitter that are affiliated with the Chronicle writers that I've also started following.
Yeah. That's cool. I feel like there actually like are a lot of kind of thematic parallels between how much you care about pay equity and like systems and kind of tracking in the business tech world, and a lot of this stuff, because a lot of it is like broken in similar ways, and there are similar like information walls and mismatches and stuff. So I'm sure you'll like learn relevant things from one kind of end to the other.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a parallel too, which is not just that systems are important, but also that certain systems can be good broken, right? Yeah. So like it actually is a good thing that we have different states trying out different things and different cities that have different control over things, and that people can be trying out a variety of methods. Similarly with, I think, pay equity and DE&I, there isn't really any one right answer until thousands of companies go test a bunch of things and we learn from it. I just want to make sure that we're learning from it, improving over time in aggregate, and then also in isolation as, various different businesses trying to accomplish their missions.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I love that.
That's great. Well, it's exciting to see such strong thematic of justice in the world that touches both your kind of personal business that you're building, as well as kind of your other kind of thoughts and curiosities outside, because I think it's it's important stuff in the world, and it's nice to see a strong leader like you caring about it so much. So with that, I want to wrap and say thank you for joining us today, Lisa. It's been wonderful to get to know you and hear about your Assemble journey, and we're going to follow you along and track the progress and watch as you bring Assemble to the world.
Cool. Thanks so much for you guys' time, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
All right.